Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Always a blessing and honor to use the talent that God gave me to glorify His kingdom and help Him expand that. So today we're going to talk about what drives the human mind and this topic called gamification. So a quick background of myself. I started working in this field now known as gamification since 2003. Back then it was very lonely passion. People didn't understand or believe in it. They thought I created it to have more excuses to play games. But I was seriously interested in why people are so sucked into games, something that shouldn't matter in their lives, and they know there's a lot of important things they should do, exercise, study, learn, pursue God, read the Bible, and they know they should do it, but they just don't do it. They end up spending all this time doing things that don't matter. So I wanted to see if there's a way to apply what games are doing to more important things. And over the years, very blessed. A lot of organizations, governments study my work. They discovered it. And so my work so far has empowered over 1 billion user experiences. The way we do that is, or calculate that is, for instance, my work with eBay, there's 40 million sellers there, and then work with Microsoft, there's 100 million developers, and it adds up to a little over 1 billion. And I do a lot of these talks at the place like Stanford University, at Google, different places. So here's a small list of some companies I've worked with. Now what you'll notice is that these are not gaming companies. A lot of people think about gamification, think about, I work with gaming companies. But in fact, the target audience, people I work with are companies or organizations that have something that's really, really important, but potentially kind of mundane and boring. So you see something like banks, car companies, healthcare companies. I've also had a good amount of blessing helping Christian-related, faith-based organizations. So Chou, I'm currently working with them. There used to be Campus Crusade for Christ, Superbook, which is run by a Christian Broadcast Network, CBN. I did some talks at Biola University. So just really blessed to help different organizations like that too. Brings joys to my heart. Wrote a book called Actionable Gamification. So if what we talked about is very interesting today, you can potentially check out the book. If you don't like to read a book, then I have a gamified platform to learn about gamification. So so you go around the island watching a lot of videos and learning that. All right, so let's start with the basics. What is gamification? Gamification is, again, applying all those fun, exciting elements in games into what we call non-game/boring context. Things that you have to do, but you don't necessarily want to do. And at the center of gamification is what I call human-focused design, as opposed to function-focused design. So it's not human-focused versus God-focused, it's human versus function. And most systems are function-focused. They assume that people in the system will do the desired behavior, and then it optimizes for efficiency, for usability, for ergonomics. And so it's a little bit like a factory, where you assume that people do their work, because you pay them to do it, and then you figure out how to maximize your production, right? Efficiency, maybe safety. But then human-focused design remembers that people in the system have feelings, they have motivations, they have insecurities, they have reasons why they do or do not want to do something, and it optimizes for that. So that's a bit more like a theme park, where you design it to be really fun and engaging, and you can predict that people automatically want to line up for hours and hours just to enjoy the fun. Now what's interesting here is that in the case of a factory, you're paying these people to do relatively mundane work of the factory life, and in the case of a theme park, they're actually paying you to stand in line for hours and hours just to enjoy those few minutes of fun. So the reason why we call this gamification is because I believe the gaming industry is the first to master human-focused design. Because again, there's no real purpose to playing a game, right? You never have to play a game. You have to do a lot of other things, take your medicine, do your exercise, do your homework. Even if you don't like it, you kind of have to suck it up and do it. But again, for a game, you never have to play a game. The moment a game is no longer fun, you leave the game. Right? You play another game, you check your email, go to YouTube. And so because games have spent decades or even centuries, depending on how you qualify a game, there's a golf tournament and all that stuff around here. We're now learning from that discipline of trying to get people to spend sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day doing basically repetitive activities such as throwing out a bird, throwing out a bird, throwing out a bird, or matching 3 gems. People can do that again and again and again, repeatedly, for hours. My mother-in-law does it, my mom does it, they all love that. And so we're learning from the discipline, and that's why we call that gamification. Now, this is a billboard of a church. And it's kind of funny, right? It says, come here, a pastor. It's not very good, but he's short, right? So this is the assumption that, oh, well, listening to a pastor talk is something you're supposed to do, right? So, it's not enjoyable, you don't really like it, but you're supposed to. So therefore, the main feature is it's short. Hey, you just can do it, and you check your boxes. Yay, I'm a good Christian. Sunday, done. I leave, right? But when something is enjoyable, being short shouldn't be the main feature, right? If you say, we have a game that you can finish in 20 minutes, or there's a movie that ends in 20 minutes, that's like not that interesting, right? When something's enjoyable, engaging, you want it to last as long as possible, as opposed to, it ends fast. That's great. So why did it become this way? Because a lot of times the church is, again, function-focused design. They assume that people know they should be there, or their volunteers should be working, staff should be working, and people just they love God, so they'll do everything there is, and then they just optimize for, okay, these are the things you need to do. And a lot of times, it doesn't happen the way, just like gym memberships, right? We believe in the value of a gym membership. A lot of people pay for it every month, but we just don't go, right? So we believe in the value proposition, but we don't have the motivation. So whether something's useful or valuable does not necessarily mean we're actually motivated to do it. So I spent many years exploring about motivation, and I'm most known for this octagon. It's called the Octalysis Framework. It's basically a combination between the word octagon and analysis. And so I spent many years studying exactly what makes a game engaging. And I study games that are very similar to each other. Sometimes they're just clones or copycats. One just copied everything from the other. But somehow one game is very successful and the other is a big failure. And I wanted to understand why that is. So I noticed a few things. Number one, it's not because one game has game elements, the other does not have it, right? They're copycats. They all have treasure boxes, leveling up, what have you. But again, one is successful, one's a failure. It also isn't the case where the graphics determine things. Sometimes the visually stunning game is a huge failure, and the relatively ugly, low-resolution game Minecraft, RuneScape achieves mass success. So at the end of the day, I realized all the successful games have now what I call the 8 core drives of motivation. So published this framework and was very blessed. I pushed it on my blog. In a year, it was translated into 16 different languages, and that's how I got a lot of my opportunities sharing this. So inside, there's what we call the 8 core drives that motivate our behavior. Outside, there's a different example list of game design techniques to bring out those core drives. But this is a pretty busy chart. So at the beginning, we really just focus on the center core drives. Now, what's interesting about these 8 core drives is that every single thing we do, inside or outside a game, is based on one or more of these 8 core drives, which means that if there's none of these 8 core drives there, there's zero motivation. No behavior happens. So we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring what those 8 core drives are. I'm going to connect it to an event in the Bible, just to connect that. And this is a short, quick talk, but later in the afternoon, we have a longer breakout section. If you're interested, you can go to one of the 2 sections to learn more about this. So the first core drive is epic meaning and calling. This is the drive that says we're motivated because we feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And I believe this is why people, for instance, contribute to Wikipedia. We all know people don't make money when they contribute to Wikipedia, but they also don't advance their careers, update their resumes. A lot of people spend 2 or 3 hours every day after work contributing to Wikipedia because they believe they're protecting humanity's knowledge, something bigger than themselves. And of course, in the theme of this conference, we're all here because of that epic meaning and calling. We want to be closer to God. We want to pursue God and also learn how to lead people towards God. So, and in the Bible, we know that John the Baptist was very much motivated by this theme, epic meaning and calling. He does all of the things he does not because of personal advancement, not because of money, not because of curiosity. He's just preparing the way for the king to come, right? And he's in his desert doing his own thing. And it's like, hey, you guys should listen, but I'm not even making sure I'm successful myself. But he's just very motivated by that pure theme of epic meaning and calling. Now, core drive 2 is development accomplishment. So this is the drive that says because we feel like we're improving, we're leveling up, we're improving, and we're achieving mastery, we feel very engaged. And this is where sometimes, if you heard of gamification before, some people like to say, oh, just put points and badges on something. Points and badges basically fall into this theme. Points are basically counters, right? So it shows a sense of progression. So even though you're doing the same things over and over and over again, at least you see this number growing bigger and bigger and bigger, this progress bar moving, and you feel like, hey, I'm actually getting somewhere. For some people, that's like their work. It's like, oh, my job every day is the same thing, but hey, I see my bank account growing bigger and bigger, so that makes me happy. Badges are basically what we call achievement symbols. It symbolizes a sense of accomplishment. And achievement symbols can be in many different forms. Could be, trophies, could be crowns, uniform changes, could be white belt, black belt in martial arts. The key thing is that it must symbolize an accomplishment. If you give people a badge for every silly thing they do, then of course it loses meaning. A lot of times just a little plastic or a little icon. Now we can see in the Bible that Paul was very much driven by core drive development accomplishment. You can tell from his letters that he's thinking about expanding, improving itself, growing, and there's I always find it really funny that part of it he was talking about, I know a guy who was taken to the third heaven, and if it was anyone else I know, he'd be amazing, but that's just me, so I'm nothing, I'm nothing. He really, and what was really respectable about him, I was like impressed, was when the Pharisees saw Paul, right, they did not just say, this guy believes in Christ, he's an idiot. Like everyone else is like, these guys are idiots, they're stupid. But for Paul, they said, like they respected him so much beforehand. There's like, your great learning has driven you mad, right? So they're like, you're so smart, so amazing that you must be crazy to believe in Jesus, right? So they couldn't just dismiss him as being stupid and ignorant. They actually had to say, you are so smart, that's why you believe in Jesus. So you can see that his whole life, Paul has been an overachiever in all the things he does. He's really much driven by core drive 2. Core drive 3 is empowerment of creativity and feedback. This is a drive, kind of like Lego. You give users the basic building blocks, and there's an infinite amount of ways for people to use their creativity, try different strategies, see feedback, and then go back and adjust. And it's very creative and engaging process. So you can see later on, this is on the right top of the octagon, which means it's a white hat intrinsic motivation core drive. It's an evergreen type of motivation. It's the longest type of motivation. So if we look at a lot of timeless games, right? Chess, poker, golf, whatnot, it all has this core drive. So if we just look at chess. Chess, very simple game, 64 squares, 32 pieces, and people have been playing for centuries. And it's still fun today. Chess does not have to be updating all the time. Say, here's a new piece, here's a new board, a new hero enters the scene, right? Chess does not need to add more content to stay fun because our brains are entertaining itself. It's just like being a scientist, inventor, lifelong experimentation, And so this core drive is really about self-expression, meaningful choices, all the like. And we know that David actually is very much motivated by this core drive. He's a musician, he's an artist, and he likes to worship through dancing, right? And of course, that also, sometimes when you're all about self-expression, it makes people feel like you're really weird. So we know there's a case where his wife was a little upset about what he did, but he was just happy expressing himself. Okay. Core drive 4 is ownership and possession. So this is basically saying, because we feel like we own something, we want to improve it, we want to protect it, and we want to get more of it. So this goes into things like virtual currencies, virtual goods, but it's also the drive that makes us want to collect baseball cards or stamps. There's also a bit more abstract concepts, like if you spend a lot of time customizing your Facebook profile, your Dropbox folder, you feel more attachment, hence ownership over that experience. So even if a new technology comes out that's supposed to be better, we don't want to switch because we have so much ownership over this experience. And we know that in the Bible, Judas betrays Jesus because of core drive for ownership possession, right? He wanted money, right? He didn't do it because of accomplishment, not because of any other core drive we talked about and we will talk about. It was really, he was just greedy and he wanted money, and he ended up regretting it a little bit. So that's core drive for ownership possession. Of course, these core drives, they can motivate people towards a good direction or a negative direction, but there's the result of the motivation and there's the nature. So today we're here talking about the nature of that core drive. Core drive 5 is social influence and relatedness. So this is basically talking about everything you do based on what other people do, think, or say. So for instance, group quests, appreciation, competition, social appreciations, things like that. And in the Bible, we know that Adam's become socially influenced by Eve to eat the fruit, right? So he was like, I was just hanging around, and the person you gave me, God, this companion, she was the one who told me to eat it, so I ate it. So there's some people who say, well, he was sitting right there when Eve was talking to the snake, so he probably had some responsibility, but he says it's core drive 5, that's the core root of it. Core drive 6 is scarcity and patience. So this is basically saying we want something because we can't have it, or because it's hard to obtain. So anything that has like exclusivity, there's only 3 spots left, there's a limited time to do something, there's the scarcity and patience theme. So this is actually how Facebook started. At the beginning, Facebook said, well, the Facebook.com is only for Harvard students. If you didn't go to Harvard University, too bad, can't use Facebook. And then it says, well, Facebook is for Harvard, some Ivy League schools, and some other schools that your high school buddies got in, but you weren't smart enough to get in, too bad. And then it opened up to more and more schools. So when it opened up to UCLA in 2004, when I was attending it, everyone rushed into Facebook. Not because they already knew how great Facebook was, right? Because no one has used it before, but that sheer exclusivity itself made people want to join. Like, you're not allowed to go, okay, now you're allowed to go, and everyone rushes in. And that's important, right? Because if people go in one at a time, 2-3 weeks apart, then you feel like it's inactive, there's no party, you leave. It only works when everyone rushes in together and they see, wow, everyone is here, so this is where the party's at. Now, this is actually much of the sin drive. You're not supposed to do something, so therefore you actually want to do it. And we know that Eve was attracted to the forbidden fruit because it was the only thing that was out of reach, right? And so we naturally have said, you're not allowed to do this. We tend to think about, okay, but why? Well, maybe I kind of want to do it. Core drive 7 is unpredictability and curiosity. So this is the drive that says, because we don't know what's going to happen next, we're always thinking about it. This is obviously utilized in the gambling industry, but whenever you have a sweepstakes program, a lottery program, a raffle ticket system, you have this core drive. There's a lot of scientific research behind this core drive. The most famous one is called the Skinner box. Basically, scientists put a little animal, pigeon or mouse, in a box. Inside the box, there's a lever. So the first experiment is that whenever the animal presses the lever, food comes out. And what you'll see is the animal will press the lever until it's no longer hungry because it doesn't need food anymore. Makes sense. But when they switch the experiment to the point where whenever the animal presses the lever, food may or may not come out, and sometimes 2 come out, what you'll see is the animal will constantly be pressing the lever regardless if it's hungry or not, because it's just messing with its brain. Will it come out? Will it come out? Will it come out? Will it come out? And there you have a little bit of gambling addiction right there in the little Skinner box. We know in the Bible, Moses was driven to the burning bush because of that curiosity thing. It's like, why is that bush burning but not burning up, right? So that's an unusual event. It drove his curiosity, and he went to the bush, and of course, that's how he encountered God through that. Core drive 8 is loss and avoidance. Very straightforward. You're doing something to avoid loss. You don't want something bad to happen. It's the fear core drive. Dictators love to use it. It's very reliable. We'll talk about later why it's what we call a black hat type of motivation, which doesn't make people feel comfortable, but it drives a lot of urgency. But we know in the Bible that the Pharisees plot against Jesus because of this core drive, right? They were like respected among people, and they're like, yeah, we're awesome. And Jesus comes down and says, you guys are hypocrites. You guys aren't doing good work. And like, oh, Jesus is making us look really bad, right? We got to get rid of him. So that core drive 8, loss and avoidance, motivated them to plot against Jesus. Now, of course, not just villains are motivated by this, right? Peter also denies Jesus multiple times because of loss and avoidance, right? Peter was like, yeah, I'm going to go die with you, Jesus. I'm your most loyal follower. And then he's like, oh, Jesus got beat up really badly. That looks kind of scary, right? And it's like, oh, yeah, I kind of don't know this guy, Yeah, he's cool, but I know him. So loss and avoidance is very powerful, but again, isn't always the way we like to be motivated on. So that's the main 8 core drives. It's worth mentioning again that everything we do is based on one or more of these 8 core drives. We're going to talk about later on in the today breakout session where there's also a difference between left brain, right brain core drives, how one connects to extrinsic motivation, one connects to intrinsic motivation. Now I'm just kind of going a quick overview of what is to come if you learn more. There's what we call white hat motivation. Makes people feel powerful, in control, they feel good, but there's no sense of urgency. Then there's what we call black hat motivation that makes people feel urgent, obsessed, even addicted, but in the long run, it leaves a bad taste in their mouths because they feel like they're not in control of their own behavior. And then we can talk about different systems where they use different core drives to motivate people. We'll learn about how experiences are built through those phases, those motivation, how people discover, let's say, the church experience, what is onboarding like, what motivates them, scaffolding. We can discover how different player types, people are different motivated differently, how different player types are motivated through these different phases. So to close, I want to say that Jesus, when he recruited his disciples, he actually utilized all these 8 core drives, right? He just, he wasn't like just saying, come here and I'll pay you or whatnot, right? He just said in one sentence, right? He says, follow me and I'll make you fishermen of men, right? And these people, first of all, there's epic meaning and calling, right? It's like, wow, you're bringing me to something bigger than myself. I'm not just being a fisherman, I'm a fisherman of men. And there's development and accomplishment. These people are fishermen, so they care about what's being great fishermen, right? So it's like you can be a great at what you do, but just even beyond. There's empowerment of creativity and feedback. It's about, how do I actually do this? There's some creative, meaningful choices, and there's the choice you want to follow him or not. There's ownership, possession, of course, gathering more men, more fish. That's what they do. Social influence and relatedness, core drive 5. They're like, wow, this person seems so charismatic. I'm instantly attracted to Jesus, right? There's scarcity, right? Jesus would say, yeah, think about it, talk to your family, So he just said it and walked away, right? So it's like, well, it's either now or never, right? It's a scarce opportunity, and there's that loss and avoidance, like there's FOMO. If I just let him walk away, then I will lose this opportunity for my entire life. So that's core drive 6 and 8. And there's obviously unpredictable curiosity. He obviously drives a lot of curiosity. Like, what does he mean? I don't understand. So with one sentence, he brought out all these 8 core drives, and the fishermen just threw down their nets and followed him, which is, I always think that's amazing. That's like you go to work one day, you're carrying a briefcase, and Jesus, like, a guy walks by, says, and you just throw away your briefcase and just start running towards him. It's like kind of awkward, right? But it is very powerful in terms of driving their actions. So again, that's the Octalysis Framework. If you want to learn more, you can show up in the afternoon sessions, see in the breakouts. If you won't be able to make that, then again, you can check out my book, Actionable Gamification, or go to Octalysis Prime. Yeah, thank you very much.
Give it up for you, Kai. Thanks so much, man. That's awesome. This was great. So you just talked about 8 different things that really motivate people and engage people, which is the name of our game. You're talking to a lot of church leaders here. If we can get real practical for a minute, maybe even specifically, a lot of us are experimenting or doing online worship experiences. So kind of as you reached into those 8, what would you say to us if we're developing like an online experience and we want to tap into the wisdom of what you're talking about? What are some stuff you could say to us about how we would design that, or other practical low-lying fruit that we could grab a hold of from this?
Okay, so in terms of online experiences, again, people are there mostly still because the underlying core drive is epic meaning and calling, right? They feel like, I want to pursue God. And then there's a little bit of loss and avoidance. They feel like, it's actually inconvenient, or my lifestyle, it's hard to actually attend a physical church, so they go online. But the one big thing I think the online experience should have is core drive 5, social influence and relatedness. People go to church to get closer to God, but also be part of that community. And we know that community is very important, right? You care about each other, you pray for each other. That's why a lot of churches, they say, our goal is to get someone, if they're visiting, is to get them in one of the smaller groups, small families, right? Because that's create cohesiveness and stickiness. So the thing that you lose in the online church experiences usually is you get the sermon, the message, the information, but you don't have that community feel anymore. And occasionally you'll see, like, depending on what technology you use, like little chats, whatnot, but the idea is if there's a way to actually build community, like you actually know the other people who's listening alongside you. Maybe they're people in your city, your region, right? And you actually know their problems, what you should pray for them. You actually build social connections, not just from watching a sermon. I think
not just 27 people are online with you now, but
no.
As much as you can know something about them.
Yeah, so the 27 people watching is a little bit of social proof, so you feel like there's some credibility in watching, but I think it's important to establish human connections. I think, especially for the new generation, right? They're on their computers a lot, and the key thing is, even though technology is more and more advanced, things are more convenient, depression and suicide is actually at its highest. And actually, I heard the top 2 deaths now in the U.S. is from suicide and drug overdose. That it surpassed traffics. And so we know that they're actually not being fulfilled. And so obviously what we know, the 2 ways to fulfill people are, have this sense of connection and relationship with God, but also having connection with people. I mean, it's pretty simple. That's why God created us to have relationships.
So taking advantage of technology doesn't mean to minimize human relationship, but it's really a way to accentuate it, isn't it? So Okay, so what are some other cool examples you could maybe think of? I shouldn't maybe say cool examples, but useful examples of technology in this gamification idea. So like, how could the church better appropriate this idea in like a practical way? What are some examples of where you've seen that played out to gamify stuff that really helps us accomplish mission?
Yeah, so I think there's two routes, right? Sometimes when you look at cool, it is technology. Some churches build some apps to motivate people to share the faith and whatnot. But I think a lot of times the effective things are very basic. It doesn't require any technology at all. Like, for instance, going back to that social influence and relatedness, like I used to move a lot, and I usually go to visit a lot of churches. And they'll always say, hey, if you're a new person, then raise your hand. And I usually don't want to do that because I know if I raise my hand, they'll make me fill out a form and on some kind of list, and they'll start spamming me. And I'm not committed to the church yet, right? Because I'm seen as a target, as a data point. I'm not seen as a human being who has feelings, right? And so what I actually do at my church every once in a while when I'm the volunteer for that is when someone raises a hand and I'm supposed to be the person giving that form, I just sit next to them. And I'll talk to them, like, oh, that's the pastor's wife. I'll talk to him. I'm basically being a friend first, right? And at the end of everything, they feel comfortable. It depends on how many people are new. But then I'll say, hey, we're glad you're here, and we have different small groups. If you want, I can go fetch you a contact form, and we can let you know what you can join, right? So you first establish that human connection, that friendship. Like, I care about you as a person. And then you said, I want to invite you into the family, as opposed to, like these little basic things make a big difference. Also, just one church I've seen, I think Reality in San Francisco. What they do is, because a lot of churches want to say, oh, well, if you come to visit later on, we want you to mingle with more people. A lot of people show up, listen, and they walk away. So what they do is they just have some small leaders, they raise a flag and it says Thai food or Mexican food, and it says right after this we're going to go food. If you want Mexican, follow the Mexican food leader. If you want Thai food, and it's just like, well, I'm new here, I don't feel comfortable talking to anyone, but yeah, let's go to the Mexican food line. And then you end up having a lunch with people, and you kind of start building that connection. That's why you would want to stay at that church.
That's an awesome high-tech answer right there.
Yeah, for my clients, I recommend a lot of really high-tech things, but they're hard to do, right? And then
what school did you go to come up with that?
What?
So never mind. So last question. So there's a lot of people in here. We kind of traditional track in a way. Well, you're a geek, and a lot of people in here aren't. But we got a lot of people in our churches that are geeks and nerds. But they love Jesus. What advice would you give to us to encourage and nurture geeks and nerds like you and my son to use what God's given them for the Lord? I mean, you're doing an amazing thing here, but how can we get better at this?
Yeah, I think the big advice I would give to the average person out there is really understand how this game of life is truly scored, right? Usually when we live in society and watch TV, they'll tell you how to be successful, how you scored, right? By your success, by your wealth, all that stuff. But in the Bible it says, no, those things are not ways you score in this game. You actually have to do these other things, be kind to people, be generous, first follow God. Those are the ways you achieve high score in this game you played. And then how I see it is when you leave this world, that's when you leave that computer almost, and you stand up and you're like, hey, God will say, how did you play the game? I kind of just went around in circles, did nothing that was really important. Or I actually leveled up my character, right? I did a lot of things. I helped expand the kingdom, right? So I think a lot of people, especially geeks, they are actually able to do a lot of deep planning in a game, career planning. What's level 60 going to be like, 70? How all my skills synergize? What are the allies I need to make? And then you ask them, so what are you going to do with your real life? Like, oh, it's so hard, I want to think about it. So they are actually capable of advanced planning and thinking about who they should be friends with and what are the quests they should do. It's just they don't make that connection. And I think it's important to connect. Like, this is a game that God made us play, and He gave us specific rules on how to score well on it, and it's about actually doing it.
Awesome. Hey, we appreciate you so much. Let's give it up one more time for you, Kai. Thanks for being with us, buddy. Everybody get ready for Matt Merrill.